I'm Andrea Isabel Lucas, founder of Bar and Soul and author of Own It All. The Own It All podcast is all about how to stop waiting for change and start creating it because your life belongs to you. Every week, I interview inspiring women and they share their tips about how to own it all in the various areas of your life, like career, time management, health, style, and relationships. Tune in every week so they can share their advice with you. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review in your favorite listening app. Hi, and welcome to the Own It All podcast. I'm Andrea Isabel Lucas, and today we have Sara Mora, a really amazing young woman. She seriously owns her goals. At 22 years old, she's an activist and a social media influencer. She's a sought-after speaker at immigrant rights events because of her work as an extraordinarily dedicated, smart, and compassionate advocate for immigrant rights and women. She was elected as the co-president for Women's March Youth Empower National Cohort. Her thousands of followers have been a tool for Sara to truly advocate and speak out via social media regarding the many critical issues taking place in government. Sara has given speeches and led marches on more than a dozen occasions across the country and has authored acclaimed opinion pieces that have shaped the debate on the DREAM Act, both in her home of New Jersey and nationally. Welcome, Sara.
Hi, thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. This is so exciting. I have so many things I want to ask you about. You gave a really powerful quote in the interview that you did for my book when I had asked about what your legacy was that you were building. And you said, I'm undocumented, so my legacy is one of resilience and of exceeding expectations placed over how successful one can be based off identity, culture, and or any limitations. I wanted to just start by asking, so that I know I really understand and that our listeners understand, what does it mean to be undocumented?
It means that we get placed into a certain box all the time. Like many marginalized communities, being undocumented means that people get to assume who we are before they know us. But I think it also means that despite my circumstances, I've personally chosen to just override that. And I think another thing I'm kind of spearheading on social media is the conversation that not every undocumented person is going to be a genius or like some entrepreneur. Because I think sometimes it takes courage to do something like entrepreneurial work. When you're undocumented, you almost feel like you're on survival mode all the time. And that many times could limit your dreams. So I think it means multiple things, but that's a little bit of what I feel like it means right now.
Absolutely. I think it always takes courage to be doing anything entrepreneurial. And I can't even imagine what it must be like. I mean, you use the word survival. So can you say a little bit more about what that could look like on a practical or on a day-to-day level?
Yeah, I think it's very real, right? So because of social media, people who just go viral or people who share their story can have a platform and share that with the community. But I think sharing your story doesn't ease the reality or the harshness of what could happen to somebody that's undocumented or like any other person in any marginalized space. So I think despite being brave, like many young people are for sharing, and despite just speaking out, it's just very real. So it's an everyday thing. I mean, I'm worried for my parents' safety 24/7, worried for my sister, and myself and people all across the country. Like it's just too raw, and there's really no other words to explain it. Like it's just as real as it gets. For despite what you do, you risk that every single day. That's kind of just something you do have to live with if you choose to stay in the country, right? Because you're undocumented, you don't have protection from the government. So it's as simple as getting arrested because of a regular stop by a cop for something as simple as a tail light could turn out and getting deported. Like it just could turn up really fast for people. And I mean, it's everything. Obviously, if you're the father of a house and you get stopped and you're risking deportation, that immediately puts your entire family in a financial hole because now you're the head of the house and who's going to be the provider. I think it's everything. So I think it's a little overwhelming to want to explain everybody's feelings because I also grew up in Jersey, which is a lot more safer than the border states or middle states that I feel are a million times more marginalized than my state. And so I'm really conscious and trying to define what it means to be undocumented in all spaces because every state is its own little country and the politics within it and the way that people are discriminated against is so aggressively different. And I grew up in a place where I didn't feel undocumented because people were as marginalized as I was, but for different reasons. And it wasn't until college that I started to really bring up my undocumented status, and I felt the retaliation from people who were privileged that were now in my college. And I didn't even go to a 4 year. I went to community college. But yeah, the people were just retaliating against that. Like, oh, well, if you're undocumented, then you shouldn't be here. And then like conversation turned up even more when I went viral online. So I think all across the table, it's just not a good place to be in. Like my parents were spent half their life in Costa Rica and half their life here, and like now they're stuck here because if they want to go back, they can't come back in here, and neither can my sister and I. So it's just like different for everyone, but not at the same time. It's fear all across. And I always say, despite the fear, people are brave because they push through. But if we're being realistic, what kind of lifestyle is that? You know what I'm saying? If you haven't seen your family in
Mhm.
20 years, I think it's just simple logic that who's happy like that? I mean, you know what I mean? It's just like, it's very constraining and I think emotionally draining for people that are undocumented because like you're one of the system's most rough workers. Like you're doing the work that nobody else wants to do and you're given such little access. And like while you're at it, you're not even truly being given, I guess, a voice or a seat at the table in the country. You're always treated as like a fourth class citizen. So it's a lot of context and it's a lot of trying to like I guess put into small words what everyone feels, but that's just a little perspective about what people like my family group feels or what we feel at least.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing what your experience is like, for acknowledging that you can't possibly speak to all the experiences. And, it's like we've all got privilege in one way or another, right? And so you're saying that, like, even though your family is undocumented and you're dealing with these struggles, it's not as bad as what somebody might be dealing with in a border state. And I think it's important that you mention that because some of our listeners might be looking around and feeling like, well, where I live, it doesn't seem that bad. And you just raise a really good point that it's a little bit different everywhere. But the underlying feeling of not being what you said, I think was like represented or supported by the government, that much is the same.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I could definitely add that, like, despite it not being the same direct risk as other states, the working situation doesn't change. So my mom still cleans houses. My dad still does like hardcore labor with regards to like mechanic work. And like that's heartbreaking every single day. And heartbreaking is like the weakest word that I could think of. It's an understatement. It's
Mhm.
completely emotionally draining to see my mom go into spaces where she's cleaning for people that are just the least human possible, and that's something that people don't get to hear. Those are the stories and like emotions and feelings that people don't get to hear. So I feel like my mission this year is to build sponsorships with organizations who are going to fund women that clean houses to start their own business or simply create a means of financial stability without cleaning houses, because it's just ridiculous. Like the abuse that people go through, like people can't imagine it. So I just have to add that because that's definitely not light what my parents go through. And like that's
Mhm.
probably one of the leading things that motivates me to wake up every day and work like I'm like 90 years old or something.
That's your why, and that's what you're committed to, and that's what your mission is. And you're definitely not 90 years old. How old are you?
I'm 22.
Amazing. And how long have you been doing this work as an immigrant rights activist?
So I've been doing this work since I graduated high school, which was 17, which is like 5 years now. I mean, I was like going into diplomacy, I was going into psychology, I was like in completely different majors, but like I guess I never got that perspective in high school. My high school environment was very rough. I grew up in a very underprivileged community. And I was always concerned about my friends in school because, again, the environment was very insane and like we didn't really have that much mentorship. So it wasn't really until I graduated high school that I started to look at like the political climate and it started to kind of click just how little people considered undocumented people. And that's what I started to observe. The entire concept wasn't as relevant to me until I exactly just graduated. And it had only been 2 years after Obama's administration implemented DACA that I started doing activism. But yeah, it started by asking, like, I interviewed the president of Costa Rica, which is where I was born, regarding DACA, and he was not aware of the program. And so I used that to kind of spearhead a conversation on how could countries of over 800,000 plus people support the people in the US, right? Like how like we're consulates building programs, we're governments building programs, what was being done for this crisis. And I wasn't really able to do much because I guess I don't know if I didn't know how to build something, or I was probably just like shocked that I even got to have that conversation with the president at the moment. And then I started doing activism at a college level and just really bringing the conversation about immigration reform to community college. And I founded like a Model UN. I started a Syrian refugee mentorship program. And I just, yeah, just like kept just doing that work in college. But it started because of DACA.
Now, one thing I thought was really interesting when you were describing this really early accomplishment that you had of being able to interview the president of Costa Rica, and you said that you maybe weren't kind of prepared for such a big opportunity and didn't really feel like it went anywhere at the time. But don't you feel like that must have been amazing for your confidence to be able to feel like, holy crap, like I can actually really do something. Like I can really do the things that I set out to do.
Definitely. I think I was actually sharing that with a friend yesterday. Within the activism space, within speaking out about topics that I do believe many youth did not feel empowered to address at the time I did it, came confidence, right? Like it came that security and that realization that, wait, there isn't people sitting here doing this. Like, there isn't youth standing here waiting to ask this question. Like, I just didn't see any. It was 2014, and there hadn't been as many viral activists or just viral young people speaking. But my mom was like the biggest motivator. Like, she just set it up, walked in, and she was just like, Mr. President, it's a pleasure to meet you. This is my daughter, and she's going to ask you a question. And that made me want to cry so much in the moment because, like, it makes me
Mm,
want to cry now. Oh my god. Because she's so strong, and like that day she actually just came from like cleaning houses,
mm,
and like it's really her. Like she's the one that's always talking to me about how like everything is possible and faith, and like yeah, definitely it definitely helped my confidence, and I think it sparked being able to interview so many other elected officials in the way that I have, and that's what's led to other opportunities because I also September that passed I interviewed the vice president of Costa Rica, so it was like a follow-up after 4 years, and she's the first Afro-Latina vice president elected in the history of Costa Rica. And I did the same thing. I interviewed her about DACA, immigration reform, and women's rights.
yeah.
And now I'm actually going to be spearheading a program with the consulate funded by the government of Costa Rica, which I haven't announced, but this is an informal announcement of that.
Wow. Oh my God. Congratulations. And I also might cry because I cry really easily and I'm a mom. So yeah, that is really emotional and that's really powerful to think about how she's really set you on this incredible path. I would love to ask you a little bit about goals because that's something that clearly you're really powerful at manifesting, making your goals happen. I would say that a lot of people out there probably have a goal to be more involved in activism in some way and maybe don't really know what that looks like or how to know if they're succeeding at it or even kind of like where to start. Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, I think I was actually thinking about this yesterday. I think activism is really trendy. So I'm going to start on that note just because I feel like activism is accountability and it's being educated and it's knowing when to step back more than knowing when to speak up. And I say that because like I'm very conscious now more than ever about my privilege at all points. And I speak about my undocumented status. So I think one big advice I'll give anyone wanting to be an activist is just like self awareness, because I think we're living in very insane times because of social media. So while it's really amazing, it's also very emotionally draining when, like, personally, as an activist, I see somebody with the name activist, but they're like they really lack social awareness, right? So I think
Mm,
it's hurtful to the movement when there isn't that true intersectionality. And like, I check myself all the time so that I feel like I have, I guess, the face to check others if I have the opportunity. So I like, again, I know that's maybe a rough note to start for like giving advice for activism, but it's not really. I think it's important for people to recognize that if you're going to be part of activism, you have to be conscious of what role you play and what your identity, I guess, kind of just naturally already makes you.
Mhm.
And like I said, I'm undocumented. So even in my undocumented status, I'm also just always checking myself with regards to what I can talk about, what I should invite somebody else to talk on, what I
Mm,
cannot give an opinion on. And just like the biggest thing is educating ourselves, right? Because we all get excited and pumped up when it comes to fighting for rights. And that's beautiful because that's how ideally imagine if every human thought, wow, I should be out here being an activist and really spearheading like change. That's the same issue that we are advocating for, right? To get people a seat at the table that aren't being heard, right? So it's like the irony of it all is just self-awareness because we live in ego-driven like time periods. That's my biggest thing and observation that I want to talk about in 2019. Like the goal is not for everyone to be an activist because the point of activism is to put people in places. It's to have people not be marginalized, right? So I don't know, just like kind of checking our intentions and like still showing up to events, still inviting others, still empowering others. So by all means, like to stay encouraged about advocating, but to always realize that in spaces like this, there's so much to learn, right? So yeah, a lot of self-awareness, a lot of informing ourselves, a lot of listening. It's important. That's what activism is really about. It's being aware, and it's important for people to feel, okay, yes, I do need to be more mindful. It shouldn't feel light. It's just like very important in activism because, again, that's the point of activism. The point of activism is not for people to all be out here being activists. Like, we're in rough times and we will need a lot of activists for multiple things. But I think activism stems from that pain, from that personal story. So it's really important to know, yeah, what role you could play in best helping because it's not always the main lead role.
exactly. And I feel like there's this concept of leadership. Like a lot of people think if I'm going to be an activist, that means I have to be a leader. And then there's also this concept of fellowship, which I think is equally important. Maybe I am someone that I've been through domestic violence and I am in a place to be a leader and speak out there, but you're in a place to be a leader to speak out about immigrant rights, and I'm in a place to be a follower and to learn from you and to listen to your story and amplify your
Right.
voice as opposed to trying to be pompous and act like I know all about it. And actually it kind of takes the pressure off because you don't have to speak about things that you're not intimately acquainted with. Like what you have to do is be willing to listen. Yeah, and like follow in a way that helps support people that are doing amazing work that you can really get behind, I think.
Definitely, yeah, and you shouldn't. You should never speak on something that you don't not only know about, but like don't feel, right? I think that's the problem. Like, I'm not going to get up and speak about Black Lives Matter because I'm not black and I'm not. I grew up in what they call the hood, and like while I have friends that passed away to gun violence, like I know my role at the table and I know how harmful it would be for me to get up and do that. So it's like it's the same concept. It's really just that self awareness because it's really just like it's a silly time to do that. That's all I'm saying. Like there is people doing that work that do need that support, like you just said, and like that's very important to do to amplify the voices of people who are literally speaking up out of being marginalized. So I don't think the irony gets any more clear about how silly it would be to try to speak for them, right?
Totally. And I think it's okay to, like you said, it's okay to sound a little bit harsh. It's tough love. Like we kind of need to know our place, and we can still be supportive from, and we didn't choose our place. That's the thing. That's the point in all of this is that like nobody nobody chooses their socioeconomic status completely. We just have to be aware of what our experiences have been and haven't been. And it's no reason not to support something that you feel passionate about and that's tugging on your heartstrings. Like I feel like I went to this amazing talk with Sean King one time when he was here in Boston, and he said, your purpose in life is embedded and can be found in what bothers you. And his advice was to be bothered. And sometimes the things that bother us maybe haven't affected us directly, but if it bothers you, like that's a place to start to find the voices that you can get behind, that you can follow and that you can amplify. I think that's huge.
Definitely. I agree.
So while we're here on the topic of goals, and I know we've been talking about stuff that can be hard, like looking at our activism goals and how to navigate what can be a kind of a touchy space. I want to shift gears a little bit just to talk about goals in general, because again, I think you've been accomplishing really remarkable things. You've been at this actually not that short a time. You've been doing it for 5 years, but you started really young and you've already accomplished some amazing goals. Can you tell us a little bit about goals that you have set, anything about the process of your goal setting process and how that went for you?
Yeah, I feel like sometimes now in conversation with certain friends or people that I meet on Instagram, when we finally meet in person, they ask me, "How do you do it?" Right? And it's a little motivating and exciting to hear people say that, because that must mean from the outside it looks like I'm doing a lot. So to me, I feel like despite doing so much, because I'm conscious that I do, I still don't feel like I'm doing everything I want to do. So I think part of like goal
Right.
setting for me has always looked like doing everything. And I feel like that's
Mhm.
hard to break down, because that's literally like the thing. Like I just do multiple things at the same time with equal dedication and equal passion. And I think what helps is that they're all intertwined some way. But I think my biggest goal once I shared my story when DACA was rescinded was finding the way to build my Instagram to be a voice, like a solid one, and to be able to build a community. And then this fundraiser that I set up for this missions trip kind of brought that to light, because it was like so many people were saying, despite your following, fundraising is so difficult. And it's been a couple of days and we're at 1.6K. And I don't know, just community building for me has been so important always, because I'm a person who's trying to be very specific and intentional when I share my story, very cautious,
Mhm.
and I'm very much about legacy building. So I think this past year, one of the goals I was able to accomplish was to build a solid community. Despite the following number, like it's not even about that. I feel like even when I had 10K, which was exactly about a year ago, like I just felt how the community was building up, and I feel like I've been able to do that by consistently building. So like I've led my social media following to continue seeing me for the real me, and to see my up moments and then my down moments. And yeah, I feel like that was very exciting for me and overwhelming again, because I almost felt like I was like there was so much happening for me this year in a negative way around August, that I just felt like I was going to be silenced, and like my voice wasn't strong enough, and like I wouldn't be able to help others because now I was being kind of put into place. And like without getting into too many details, immediately things started shifting. And I think it's just crazy. It's just crazy goal setting and really pushing. And I don't know, I think a lot of it is like also my passion for humanity, period, because of my struggle. Like my struggle
Mm.
has made me see everybody as like just so real. And I think although that might sound silly, I don't think it is. Like I think not everybody's as present as they want to be, or are conscious to be.
Mhm.
So I think goal setting has been very emotional, and accomplishing the goal of building community has meant everything to me, because I didn't want to be just some person that people like idolized or like thought, oh, she must be perfect, because I was literally not and was going through so much. So that was like a very important goal for me to accomplish this past year.
I'm hearing so much in that I want to kind of take a second to unpack. One thing that I heard you say is that you have huge dreams and ideals and you hold yourself to a really high standard. So people are saying to you, "Oh my god, how do you do it?" And you're like, "Oh wow, I must be doing something impressive," or so it seems to them because they're asking me how I do it. Meanwhile, what they're seeing are the wins. They're not seeing all the 50 million directions that you're like spraying energy in all these directions, all these huge dreams that you have and the things that you want to accomplish. What they're seeing are the things that are coming to fruition. And in your mind, your vision is so huge that to you, it's like, oh my God, there's so much I haven't even begun to accomplish.
Yeah.
I think it's important for people to realize that because it kind of goes to that whole highlight reel thing where we see each other on social media and everything looks so impressive, but like you don't know what that person's day to day reality is. You don't know like how big of a zit that they have that, that their like day is like thrown off or like, silly things like that. You don't know that like there are epic failures happening in their life right now or epic struggles happening that they may or may not be able to share about. And so, I think letting go of that perfectionism that you're going to just have like birds and butterflies chirping around you while you're just crushing every single goal and and it all looks Instagram worthy. I think that's huge, to really give yourself the space that like you're going to set your goals and you're going to work your ass off because you have your why. You know why you're doing it. You have in your heart a love for humanity, and the goal is so much bigger than you. It's about something that's going to touch thousands of people, but that doesn't mean that everything is going to be an instant success. Hey, it's Andrea here. I just wanted to take a moment to remind you to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite listening app. Or if you're not sure how to do that, just go to andreaisabellucas.com/podcast. And your 5-star reviews are always appreciated. When you take the time to rate and review, it helps this podcast to reach more people. Also, don't forget my book, Own It All, is coming out this March, so stay tuned. I can't wait to share it with you.
Exactly. And I think just even you saying the whole perfectionism thing, there's been times where I literally want to I'm so tempted to grab the camera and like show people that I'm crying, or like show people that I'm not okay with regards to anything, or when something feels like it looks too perfect, it makes me mad. Like, because I'm just like, no, please do not misunderstand my platform. Like, I am a product of pain. Like, I'm a product. Oh my God, it makes me want to cry every time I talk about this, because it's just like so emotional to talk about what went good, because I was like, damn, but can I talk about what went bad?
Yeah.
You know, and like I feel like that's really what's made me like mature and solid, like the difficulties. And I think again, difficult is such a small word to talk about the things that have almost, I feel like, silenced me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it's a lot. Like I think it's a really important, I would say, exciting thing that I want to do this year. Like continue to just pop that bubble and say, stop it. Like, stop expecting these people to be perfect, and stop expecting that from yourself, which is the biggest thing I want people to do, you know? And I think that builds community, because it shows people, I mean, what's going to go viral is going to go viral for being silly. But when we get the chance to kind of use our platform to be that like mentor, like I think it's an honor, and it's showing youth that there could be influencers that are really just mindful, and then there's influencers who aren't. So you kind of get two options versus not having any.
I love that so, so much. And you made a great point that your struggles have helped you gain maturity. And honestly, it helps you gain credibility. Like, what's the point of having a giant platform if you've never been through anything, you don't have any life experience, and you haven't ever had to overcome anything? Like, how is that supposed to inspire someone?
Yeah, right.
When you mentioned something interesting about how you started out, your followers were at 10,000 about a year ago, and you said there was a point when things were actually at their worst, that things shifted. What did you mean about how they shifted?
Overall, it was just my darkest time, honestly, in my life this far. And it was because of multiple reasons. And yeah, one of the reasons was actually too that I hadn't realized how much the movement impacted my physical health. So like I'd gained so much weight, and I was never like I wasn't overweight. Like, it wasn't part of my natural way of being. Like, I'm very thin framed, and like I was at 240, like probably 240, 245 August. So like I was just like in a dark place physically, emotionally, spiritually. I believe in God. So like I was in a dark place, and I really just so many private, like different things just happening all in that month. And then I ran for president of Women's March Youth, and I got elected. And like slowly but surely, I started to see the light in little things. And I started to work out and really take care of my health that I hadn't had the chance to do since I started really digging deep into organizing, which was 2017, beginning of 2017, when I started doing that. And then now I'm at like 195. I still have like 40 pounds to go for like my height and every other measurement of mine that I should be at. But I'm like proud of myself, because I think at that dark moment, like I knew that I was stronger and I knew that I'd get out, but it was so overwhelming and so much. And I felt so muted. Like I felt like that part I couldn't speak about, and that part I couldn't be loud about. And I began to love the process. So I lost like 45 pounds. And I feel like that also reminded me of who I was, because I've always been like this. I've always been strong. So it's like I am my family, I am my community, and I am resilient. And it was almost like an act of, I feel like, revolution to try to gain my health back and gain my, like, I guess, just joy back, because I've always been a very joyful person. So yeah, I don't know. That was a really important thing to me. And I think the better things happen this year, the more I'm going to highlight how bad I felt in August and what that made me like kind of just become.
That's so powerful. I feel like there's so many important lessons in what you just shared, from being able to just keep taking actions, like putting one foot in front of the other, even when you're in the face of not winning,
Yeah.
like, and just continuing to fight. And also just self care. Like you said, if you're not feeling joy, if you're not feeling healthy, if you're not feeling yourself, if you're not feeling comfortable in your own skin, how are you supposed to help anybody else? Like, how are you supposed to have the strength to fight for anybody else if you're not even fighting for your own health and well-being? It's powerful.
And it's crazy. I just want to add because, like, I mean, I'm just proud of the people that I'm a part of, right? Like, mi gente, like anybody from Central America, from South America, because it's like the same trait. Like, yeah, I stopped to take care of myself because I was really just not okay. But so many people are advocating and fighting so hard on the ground to stop things from happening within the system, and they're not okay. So it's just like that's my motivating force. I have the privilege of stopping to do that because I'm 22 and I'm single and I'm like I don't have kids and I'm like living with my parents. But there's people older than me, or my age or younger that are advocating so hard and that are not
Mm,
okay. They're putting the community first, and that's why they're warriors, like people call them, because despite their traumas, they're sitting there fighting. And like
yeah.
that's what I'm also really conscious about. And like, that's why I've been like kind of taking the first few days to restructure how I want to come off on my platform. And I feel like one thing that happened too is people over glorified me, and that made me really hurt because within the movement, like I don't, if anything, that's what I'm trying to teach. Like, stop over glorifying people because of their following. Stop over glorifying people because of their pictures. You don't know what they're doing, right? So even if I say immigrant rights activist, you have to check people all the time. So I kind of was just like finding that space to share the reality of what I go through versus what I'm not. Like, I'm not going to sit here and like I'll share my reality within being an undocumented college student and activist and whatever. And then I'll amplify the voices of people doing the work on the ground so that everybody's just like getting that perspective, like, the proper credit. Like many times the people doing the toughest work don't have following because they don't have time for that. They don't even have like the
Mm.
headspace for that. They don't even think about social media like that. But then I do get to
Wow.
share like, well, this was my reality, right? I was in a bad place as a 22-year-old or 21-year-old then in August, and because of the movement. So it was because of advocating. It was because of feeling lost and like I wasn't doing enough for the movement and like I wasn't enough, but like everybody else thought I was, and like now I needed to find a
Mhm.
middle line. It's like all this context, I guess, is well.
God, yeah. You reminded me of probably my favorite book, and the one that's inspired me the most is this book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And he uses the analogy, what you were saying about like people with their own trauma and their own healing. Like, basically, he has this one page that talks about how everyone has trauma. Everyone has something that they need to heal. And if you wait until you're completely healed, like you're never going to be completely healed. Like, and you'll never get anything done. So he uses this analogy that you have to learn to play hurt, like, like a football player or something that just has to like go back in to the game. And that's what I thought of when you were talking, is that idea of playing hurt. It's like, yeah, I know I might be a little like dented or bruised, but I am going to keep at it. But I think it's a very fine balance, because look at how much better you're feeling now that you've been able to balance working your ass off, no doubt about it, for activism, while at the same time actually taking care of your body and your mind.
Yeah, definitely. I think this conversation motivated me to definitely keep it. I mean, that's already was like peak agenda, but I'm definitely like
Mm.
excited to kind of just yeah, share the dark side more because I think that'll give people insight into how it really is and how yeah, the fight has to continue. Like I think a lot of people stop immediately when something directly impacts them and it's like you don't know how many people are out here like literally, oh my god. I think bruise is an understatement. I think people are out here bleeding like you know what I'm saying? And they keep going. So I think if anything, we should use them as motivation. So,
Absolutely. So, what can you tell us about goals that you are currently working toward?
so goals that I'm currently working towards are two big ones, I would say. One is a consulate program. I guess there's no like better words to like give context to the fact that I'll be working with consulates of Central America to build like a professional development program. It hasn't ever been built in the history of like Central American consulates. Well, I think it's much needed, and it would really just be to serve as like a mentorship program for youth all across New Jersey, New York, and hopefully continue to expand. And that would look like just building a wide network for youth within technology, art, just like STEM, and really anything that comes to mind, even like just being an entrepreneur as a first generation young person, as an undocumented immigrant. I really feel like that started when I was 17 and I didn't know how to piece it together, and now it's happening, and it really stems from a place of knowing what it's like to be like, I'm a big sister, so I know just like really that idea of mentorship is big for me. So that program is beautiful, and I'm really excited to be formatting that. It's not official, it's not still in the works, but that's really important to me. And then also a consulting agency. So I think with branding and being in activism spaces, I feel like one of the things that has made me feel personally like hurt is just how much like the culture is like there's like no better word, but I found like somebody's expression of this and I feel like I wanted to use it. So like I feel like people milk the culture, right? So it's like this concept of like culture vulture, and like people's pains is just like put on a t-shirt and just sold like so nonchalant, and then there's like so much context that's missed, and then that's how activism is so trendy. So through seeing that and through being on panels and through speaking about my story, I was like, you know what? I'm like definitely a guru at branding because that's how I built my platform. I've been doing it at a small scale for smaller clients and businesses that I feel like are underfunded and don't have as much access. So I'm going to be launching a consulting agency. And I think the biggest mission of that is just having a seat at the table in spaces where they're speaking about underprivileged communities and getting activists on those tables. And like that's still in the works too. So I can't give any more details, but I feel like that's going to be a powerful movement because it's definitely intentional and it's not like something I'm doing because I'm bored. It's literally like stemming from being so mad, like from seeing activism since I was speaking out about my story and kind of seeing how like branding works in regards to it. And yeah, those are two of like my biggest babies for 2019.
So, can you tell us anything about your goal setting process? Do you write it down? Do you break it down into smaller steps? Like, can you elaborate on your process a bit?
I like to kind of just clarify where I'm trying to go with it because I think within goal setting sometimes the bigger picture gets lost. So for me, I find that it's more important for me to constantly just like actually I don't write it, which is insane. Now that you say it, I actually don't have a place right now where this is written down, which will obviously change when I'm breaking it down with specific just like my team. But because a lot of the stuff I've done has been just me, I guess I've gotten used to breaking stuff down in my mind, which sounds actually really insane when I'm saying it to you because there's so much going on. And I've never done anything as solid as this consulting agency or this consulate program, too. So that's something to keep in mind. So I do think it's important to really break down the bigger vision and then baby visions around how to make that happen and what's missing and kind of like breaking down how to get to that bigger vision. But my first step is always just writing my bigger vision and whatever goal I set.
So, getting clarity of your vision. Can I tell you something that I see you doing that I actually think is incredibly powerful? And I don't think it's right or wrong about writing things down. I hear what you're saying now that you have a team, you want to be able to like clearly articulate things to them, but maybe writing down your goal isn't the most important thing. Like what I see you doing that I think is actually way more important is you're telling people, you're telling everybody what you're up to.
Oh,
You're using your social media platform to share what you're trying to create. You're telling me about it right now. And I personally believe the more you speak things into existence, the more other people, it becomes real. They start to echo it back to you. You start to believe it more and more when you hear somebody say it back to you. And then you hear yourself say it again and you get more and more confident that it's really coming.
that's very true. I've never thought about it like that, but you're very right.
I feel like we don't even realize the power of our words sometimes and just how much we're creating with our, with our speech. And I don't mean that to sound like mystical, like fairies, or like sprinkling fairy dust or anything like that. It's just like we're social beings, we're language based beings. And the things that we think are real generally are real because they exist in our network of conversations. And the more we talk about them, like the more real they become. I have such a random question, but then I want to go back to goals. But, I actually think a lot of people probably do have social media goals, and they might even be embarrassed to talk about them because it's like they don't want to admit that they want to be popular. But I think having a freaking platform when you've got something to say, what could be more, empowering? Can you tell us, like, first of all, how much time a day do you have to spend on social media to be an influencer? And like, just any tips for people growing their influence and amplifying their voice on social media?
Yeah, I was gonna say that's why it's crazy, right? Because now it's gonna become this thing where like I've never done it like that, so like I don't know how much time, right? Because I think for me it's more about like why. And that's why
Mm,
it's crazy, right? Because I think that's what's leading everything. Okay, so with some of my current clients, like I just tell them the bigger thing is what you get done versus how much time you're actually on social media. Because when I'm on, everything is intentional. But that's because now my platform is like a cosign or like an endorsement. So like even my following number changed. And that was really difficult because I didn't want anybody to feel weird. But even just an example, after a certain kind of like community reach, I've observed that like your following becomes an endorsement, right? So like depending on your work and if like people respect you for whatever issue you stand for, your following is an endorsement. So that's work that I've just learned by observation. Nobody has taught me that. I didn't YouTube it. It's just observation from doing it so much. So like just how that I wouldn't be able to advise to anybody because it just depends on where your community is. The same principle goes for social media. And I think so I'll say my advice is like just be intentional every time you're on. Why are you on and what are you doing? And what I do is like I'm very, especially now with immigration reform, I'm just specific. So I'm like leading causes about labor and I'm leading causes about education or like small businesses, which I'm really interested in kind of being part of the conversation in 2019 with so many mujeres that are like older than me within the movement space that are amazing CEOs in like other parts of the country. So it's just like be intentional, don't overthink. It's really just about consistency. That's like just things I've observed. Like you have to be intentional
mm,
because if not, you're going to be drained. You
mhm,
can't overthink because then you're not going to have like fun and then like you're going to miss the point of social media. But you do
mhm.
have to be consistent because if you're not, then no one cares.
Okay.
And like 1 month
That,
is really all it takes to kind of build an image for in people's minds about who you are. So like you can come off as like this like music guru today, and 1 month later you're like only doing comedy, and like people will accept it. It's just about consistency. And
okay.
that's the problem, right? People go on social media and they overthink and they care too much. So then that's why they don't build. Like when I started building, I was savagely building, and everybody around me, adults, people my age, were just like, "What are you doing? Like you're
Mm,
spending too much time on social media. Like what are you doing?" And that's a story I haven't gotten to tell yet. But I guess this is the day to share that piece. Like people were just looking at me like I was crazy. And now everybody, and I'm not exaggerating, every single person that ever like said anything funky about me, and they did to my family or to like just in any environment, is like, oh my goodness, she's like a social media guru. And I'm like laughing because I'm like, you get on my nerves, guys, because you know what I'm saying? I needed your support when I was like starting, but
mm,
it's normal. It's normal human behavior to kind of question people when they do things out of the loop. But that is social media. You have to do things out of the box. And like that
mm,
requires being consistent, which means you're going to be like no one else if you're posting all the time and passionate.
mm.
Like I used to post when I had 1K, I was posting like I was talking to 10,000 people. I remember I visualized it, and that was 3 years ago.
That's visualization coming up again. So it sounds like visualization is a huge part of your goal setting process.
Yeah, I think I mean, I'm going to be real. I'm spiritual, like I'm Christian, so I believe in like God and the Holy Spirit. So I think a lot of it was like visions that I got and like
Mm,
really praying a lot, and I really had this vision of being somebody of positive influence to the world in a way that wasn't like everybody else. So I think a lot of this was me practicing mindfulness and like realizing like I grew up being a youth leader, right? So at 14 I was like leading like a chorus in like church.
mm,
So like working with youth and like being part of this like spiritual surrounding taught me that, like taught me accountability and taught me preparing for like the future, right? Preparing to be a leader by practicing in the moment. So like when I spoke to people, I spoke like that because I realized everybody's important, even if one person's watching. So then it was like practicing that now when I talk, everyone's like, how are you not scared? I'm like, wait, I've been doing this for way too long. Like now I realize this message is about so many other people than me, but I know this because it's been forever of practicing it.
Wow, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I feel like that was so moving what you just shared about, this is a spiritual path that you're on. Like, I feel like you're a prophet. Like, this isn't about your ego. You're not trying to be a friggin' celebrity. You're trying to actually change the world and be about something so much bigger than yourself. This is a sacred mission that you're on. It's not about a stupid number of followers, it's something so much bigger than that.
Thank you. And I really hope that I could reflect that this year because it makes me sad and it worries me because I want more youth to see that too. Like I want them to see that and be like, yes, wow, wait, that's so true. I heard that at church or I heard that through my parents or I saw that in a book. That consciousness of like, wait, there's something bigger than me and it's not about me. And like, boom, the bubble pops and you realize, wait, I could walk and kind of just be this conscious being that's waking others up about how much it's important to be woken up and like, yeah, so thank you for that.
So, Sarah, I've been through like all the emotions in this hour. Like, I'm so freaking moved by what you have shared. I'm so inspired by your passion. I'm so inspired by the drive that you have to do something that's so big. Like, I know in your mind it's already bigger than any of us can even imagine. And if that's what you're envisioning, I have no doubt that you will accomplish it and more. You've been getting tons of amazing press. You have insane projects and speaking engagements lined up. Do you want to tell us about some of those?
Yeah, I think one of the most exciting ones is just being able to be at the Women's March this year because I got elected 2018 and we've been doing work around voter rights and just like voter registration, youth voter motivation, I guess you could say.
Mhm.
So it's been like exciting to be around so many young people that are just like passionate to learn and passionate to do the work. So being able to speak at Women's March is very exciting and overwhelming too, because I think it's been really rough. It's been a really rough year, at least for me personally, ever since DACA was rescinded. So when I share my story, it feels more emotional than it feels like happy. It feels like
Right.
conflicting because it's like, wow, so many people like me are not here in the country anymore or are not okay or just like so many other things. So yeah, that's exciting, Women's March. And I also think right after I'm going to be in San Diego doing groundwork with one of the organizations at the border in solidarity with the migrant caravan. So I think while that's not a speaking opportunity, it's really an opportunity to be on the ground doing the work that I am the most passionate about right now, which is immigration reform and like really helping support this community. So these are just like two of like the highlights that I feel like I'm working on right now that are so important to me because they're both tied so much to the two messages my platform's led by. But yeah, I also recently got to do an article on Elle about like what the new Congress means to me and that was so exciting, like showing my parents and like being able to just share my thoughts on what it means for me to see someone like Ocasio who looks like me, right?
Yeah, that's such a bright spot in all of this. And it's so exciting about the Women's March. I was in DC in 2017 for the first one. And I can honestly say it was like the best day of my life, like the most powerful thing I've ever been a part
It was
of.
my first protest too.
Yeah, me too. And I was a little older than you. And I also want to share something with you that, like, what you were just saying really struck a chord with me that, like, you're getting up to speak and, like, you know what? It's been a shitty year. Like, it's been hard and shit isn't fair. And you're like dealing with stuff that you don't want to be dealing with. And I've actually been there myself in the last couple of years where, like, I know you're really passionate about women's issues, and so am I. And I'm a domestic violence survivor. Like, I've been a teen mom. Like, I've been through a lot of things. And I was challenged kind of late 2017 going into 2018 with some stuff that was going on in my personal life, just legally with like the court system and, seeing some things happening that were just really completely unfair, that weren't taking into account my previous domestic violence, things like that. Like, things where I felt like I was being blamed, and things like that kind of reared their ugly head. And after I decided I was like over it and all better and beyond that. And that was really confronting to me because it really challenged my sense of empowerment. And, for a minute, it made me feel kind of small. It was like, oh, but I overcame this. I'm supposed to be this success story. I'm supposed to be this like victory over whatever, to give people hope.
Right.
And it was humbling to realize, oh, but I'm still part of this group that is discriminated against, that isn't always protected. And therefore, like, this shit can still come back and bite me. Like, I'm not so privileged or so successful or so empowered or such a badass that, like, I'm bigger than all of it. Like, yeah, I'm in a much better place now to fight back than I was, when I was more vulnerable. But at the same time, like, when you're part of a group that is discriminated against, you are vulnerable. And it doesn't mean that you're not inspiring and an important voice to get up and to share your story.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just wanted to say I could really relate to that.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share so much inspiration with our listeners today.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad that I was able to just talk about a little bit about perspective about what it's like to be an activist in this time.
Well, we will look forward to continuing to follow your story. We will have links to follow you in the show notes. And good luck on your upcoming mission, and good luck with all of your current projects. And at the Women's March, gosh, is that next weekend? This weekend?
Yeah.
So good luck with all of that.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day. Bye. I'm Andrea Isabel Lucas, and this has been the Own It All podcast. Thank you so much for listening this week. If you liked what you heard, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review on your favorite listening app. It really helps, and I would be so grateful. I'll be back next Wednesday with a brand new episode. See you then.